Hello, and thank you for joining us today on the Gentle Art of Crushing It show, where we focus on learning and sharing with our listeners all there is to know about how to create success in our lives. This show stands on the shoulders of giants. Our mission is to empower and inspire our listeners to create the life of their dreams whilst having a blast in the process. Let's celebrate life together. Welcome to the show.
All right, welcome back to the Gentle Art of Crushing It podcast. My name's Randy Smith, and I'll be the host today. And I'm really excited to have fellow GoBro with us, Alvin Uy. Alvin Uy is a decamillionaire. He's a real estate investor and a Shark Tank entrepreneur. So, Alvin, welcome to the show.
What's up? How are you, Randy? Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, no, glad to have you here. I see you all over GoBundance, and you're doing a lot of really great things. So excited to have you on the show. So let's jump in if we can. Like right out of the gates, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on today's market and how it might be impacting passive investment opportunities for those in the audience?
That's a very big question. I think more in the lines of everything's very specific to a certain market. I operate in Los Angeles, and I kind of live in a bubble here. For me, at least what I'm looking for is opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity here still. There's a housing crisis. So in terms of the current market conditions, rates are supposed to go down, and then all of a sudden they're not, and I don't know if they're going to go down anymore. But that's never really affected the way I think. In terms of what I do a lot of value add creation anyway, so it doesn't really affect me that much. I've been investing for about 21 years now, so I've seen the trends go up, so I know how to create value. So in that case, it doesn't concern me all too much, to be honest.
Love it. So your thoughts are, in the value add strategy, you kind of bypass the whole economic impacts and influences. While they might influence it, it's not going to dictate or kind of the end result of what you're doing, you don't believe?
Not necessarily, because at least for me, like I have different exit strategies in place. And so that's why I mitigate a lot of those risks. And being a good entrepreneur, being a good investor, you have to learn how to mitigate risk. And a lot of that is just educating yourself and really being able to fine tune what works and what doesn't.
Awesome. No, I love that perspective. I think we'll get into that a lot more as we dig into your strategy and the different types of projects that you're doing.
Are you interested in real estate investing but don't know where to get started or think you don't have the time or money? Are you stuck in your W-2 because the golden handcuffs make it hard to walk away? If this sounds like you, check out impactequity.net and schedule some time to talk with the founder, Randy Smith. Randy went from massive income to leaving his W-2 through passive income, and he can help you do the same. www.impactequity.net.
Maybe if we can we back up a little bit, and can you walk
Sure.
the audience through your background and maybe some of the wins? I'd love to hear more about Shark Tank and some of the other things you've done, but how did you get to where you are today, Alvin?
Yeah, how far do you want me to go back, man? Because I don't know if an hour is, long enough.
Sure. Well, maybe we keep it towards entrepreneurialism, right? I guess that could go back really far as well, though.
Yeah, there's a lot that relates to my childhood. So I think I can go back as like, I came here, I'm an immigrant. So I came here when I was 12. Family of 7, including my parents and my 4 other siblings. There's 5 siblings. Came here from the Philippines. Needless to say, my parents came here without knowing what to expect. They just kind of straight up just got to the U.S., didn't know what to do, had no job history, no credit history. Needless to say, they've spent all their money they brought, which they thought was a lot then, but it quickly got depleted. And make the long story short, we ended up at a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom, I think might have been 400 square foot house or apartment in the roughest area of Los Angeles, and sleeping on the floor. Didn't even have a mattress.
Unreal. Yeah.
Basically just blankets, and that was a rude awakening for me, especially since my parents left the Philippines from a wealthy family, of means, and they didn't know how to cook, they didn't know how to clean, they didn't know how to
Unreal.
feed us. And
Sure.
that was a huge rude awakening for me, and made me quickly realize what wealth really meant, and so, my I guess my whole world was changed after that. And I made,
Sure.
And I realized, like, wow, this is the land of opportunity. What does that mean exactly? And I keep hearing that term, like, US is the land of opportunity. So I quickly set on the path to kind of discover what that meant, and what that meant for my, basically my parents. Yeah, so I ended up, going through school, trying to figure out what to do next. And I initially became I went to college for engineering, aerospace
Okay.
engineering.
Wow.
Quickly realized this is not for me.
Yeah.
We visited a campus before in my third year, by the way, third year in college. Third year, I think it was Boeing, or I forget which one. Might be, I believe it was Boeing. And I just saw like a bunch of people just dressed up in suits and ties and locked up in their cubicle. And mind you, this was like 8 o'clock at night. And I'm like, wow, they're still working. It's just so soulless, and I'm like, I can't imagine myself doing this. And
Yeah.
I quickly made up my mind there. I'm like, okay, I'm dropping out. I don't know what to do next, but this is not for me.
Wow. So you
And
dropped
so
out of college, third year of college as an engineer.
third year of college, needless to say, my parents were really pissed. They're
I'm
like,
sure. Yeah.
what are you going to do now? And I told them, look, I'm really good at art. And they're like, art? Why art?
Right.
I've always been good. I've always been creative, right? And I like building things. And I thought, maybe that's why I wanted to be an engineer. But
Sure.
seeing myself working for someone, I just couldn't see myself doing that. So I quickly identified, okay, maybe I'll go to art, just because I need to be more creative. I feel like that's more for me. But I didn't know where to start. And at the time I was doing delivery services. I was a messenger service, kind of like dropping packages to like the
Sure.
studios. So I'm here in Los Angeles, by the way. So
Right.
a lot of the entertainment studios and things like that. And I met this one guy. He's like, I see him every day working on the computer, drawing Mickey Mouse on the computer. I'm like, oh, I want that job.
Yeah.
And I saw him in his smoke break, and I asked him, hey man, what do you do? And he's like, oh, I think he said he was a designer or something like that. I'm like, oh, that's great. How much money do you make? He goes, oh, I make about $70,000 a year. And this is like back in the 90s. And I'm like, wow, that's a lot of money.
Sure.
That's actually more money than what I would get coming out of an aerospace engineering, at the time anyway. And I asked him, did you go to school? And he's like, nope. I'm like, what? It just kind of blew my mind that can happen. And so it made these, it created this whole realm in my head of like possibilities of like, wow, I don't need to go to school. I just got to figure it out. And so I pivoted and just decided to learn how to do graphic design, because that's kind of what he was doing. And this is the beginning of computer graphics at the time. And I tried to go to school, quickly realized I couldn't afford it.
Okay.
And I definitely, decided then, like, okay, there's got to be an easier way to do this. So I took a trade school instead. Took about a year. Finally got a placement job because I passed a test or something like that, and I got placed at a agency. And I quickly realized, okay, this is exactly what I want to do. That's also about the time I read Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. But specifically Cash Flow Quadrant, which talks about investing in real estate and also being a business owner. And so I quickly plotted my way to like, okay, if I really want to make it to those two quadrants, I got to learn how to start a business.
Yeah.
And so I decided then, okay, I applied for a job at this other agency because I knew the owner was someone I could model. And this guy was like one of the top 5 agencies in all of Los Angeles, and he was Asian. And I'm like, okay, I got to follow this guy,
Yeah.
Got a job from him, and I told him on my interview, I'm like, I want to work here. I'm taking a pay cut, but just just know, like, I think one day I'm going to be helping you run this place for you. And I think I got the job because of that.
Wow. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So fast forward about 10 years later, I was working there. I was running the agency at that point. I was the senior creative director. All the while, I've also been like, I bought my first house in 2003. That's about the time I started that job because I got a hefty payment. Salary there. I'm like, okay, let me start my first job here. And
Sure. So did you
buy a house?
Did you really take a pay cut to go there, or was that just part of your interview process?
Oh, that was just part of my interview process.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Yeah.
But I would say it was still about the same amount. It's just that I felt more secure at that place, and
Sure.
at that point I've also kind of saved some money already, which interestingly enough, before I got that job, instead of renting an apartment like my brothers and siblings did, I actually asked my parents, because I had another job at the time, and I said to my parents, look, can I convert the garage and live in there? And maybe if you can kindly put me in title so I can write it off, because I've learned that stuff,
Yeah.
and I'll pay half the rent or half the mortgage. And so I was able to actually accelerate my savings because of that, because I learned how to depreciate and all the tax benefits of it.
Interesting. Yeah.
And this is relevant because, interestingly enough, like garage conversions are now a legal thing here in Los Angeles called ADUs, accessory dwelling units, which I can talk about later on. But yeah, that was kind of like my start of like, oh wow, I can save more money if I can be a little bit more creative. Why rent if I can just buy property or have some ownership? So interesting fact, I've never actually rented an apartment or a house ever in my life.
No kidding. No kidding.
Yeah, never.
And do you mind if I ask, how old were you when you did that first garage conversion with your parents or at your parents' house?
I might have been in my really early 20s.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah, really early 20s. I don't even remember. I was still in college.
Okay.
And so I was still in college when I started thinking about that way because, first of all, my parents couldn't afford anything. I couldn't afford anything. Like I couldn't dorm anywhere. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to have to live with my parents anyway.
Yeah.
And then as my brothers and, getting older, they're moving out of they're renting. And I'm like, I don't want to rent because I want to save. Because I already read Rich Dad Poor Dad about that time. Like, I don't want to rent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So so fast forward, I started, learning the business of agency, design business, and I learned how to develop products. I learned how to do marketing. It was a full agency, like branding, graphics, business, learning how to talk to clients, learning how to sell, learning how to create stories, learn how to tell stories. And it just made me really open up this vast ability of just thinking outside of the box.
Okay.
And package that with I still had my goal set on real estate being my end game, so I had that sort of on the side as well. Side hustle is
so you knew
how to flip houses. Yeah.
You knew early on that real estate was going to be the final destination after reading the Kiyosaki books.
Yes, sir. I read that. I was fortunate enough to have read that at the right time, but I was also, I guess I had an open mind because I was seeking some kind of financial freedom and just freedom in general, at the time. So I was open to it. But yeah, absolutely, that kind of really defined my path, and I just kind of stuck to that. I knew I need to go there somehow. I just didn't have the right specifics yet, but I was kind of figuring things out as I went.
Well, it's interesting too. So you're an immigrant. You see your parents come to this country for this freedom that the American dream that you hear everybody talk about, and then you see this American dream quite often includes sitting in a suit in a cubicle working 60 hours a week, where you have really no freedom at all from like you're stuck in this cubicle indefinitely. So it's interesting that you found that book early on, and that's really kind of what opened your eyes up to this whole other world. Now, had your parents, did they get into real estate as well? Were you following their footsteps, or were you kind of stepping out of the norm and doing this all on your own?
I was, oh God, that's a very, very big question. Did they do real estate? No. I mean, the reality is this, like, so, I'll go back a little bit. My parents left the country to kind of start their new legacy, I would say. My dad was being groomed to take over a business in the Philippines. I guess the family's pretty wealthy then. But my dad just wanted to set his own path. He didn't want anything to do with a family business, I guess. I can't remember exactly why.
Sure.
But by leaving the country, he essentially disobeyed his parents, and they were cut off, and ended up losing everything. And his only way to kind of prove himself was how to be successful, and which was when they first bought their first property, which is the house we lived in. They became, my grandparents kind of recognized that, oh, you actually did it. And so there's that sense of pride of ownership then, and that's actually one of the reasons why I realized, wow, that's success. That's what success in the U.S. And so I immediately sort of linked that to like, hey, real estate, read Rich Dad Poor Dad. It all made sense to me.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
It does. Absolutely. Yeah. So you spent 10 years then kind of building your career in the marketing agency. And as you said in that interview, you'd be helping him run the business. It sounds like that actually came into fruition. So did you ever like remind him of that initial conversation in the interview that you'd be working alongside him, or?
You know what? I think he kind of knew. Like we became buddies actually. Like, he would go to lunch all the time, and he'd end up mentoring me. Because I think he just knew. Like, I think he saw himself in me, and so he couldn't help but mentor me. He was also looking to exit. He's looking to looking to sell his company at one point. Actually, we had one lunch where I think he was asking me to see if I can take over and buy the business, but my brain just couldn't think big enough then. I didn't really identify that yet, and I declined. I said, no, I don't want to do that. But and first of all, I couldn't afford it anyway, even if it did. Like,
sure.
And my mind I wasn't thinking big enough to know how to even finance a business like that. And so, but yeah, I told him like, hey, but if you're looking to exit, mind you, this is about 10 years. I was kind of wanted my own thing. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't because I was kind of trapped, that golden ball of chain, where I had this itch of wanting to leave. I just couldn't because it wasn't bad enough. And it wasn't, and I was making good money.
Sure.
But at the same time, I'm like, oh, there's this missing element. Like it's not making me happy, but I don't know why, and, in that moment, of course, after we had like a bottle of scotch at that point, my heart was kind of speaking. And I told him, hey, if you're looking to sell this company, I'm the highest paid guy here. Maybe just lay me off, give me a severance package. And of course, the next day I immediately regretted that.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah. But a few months later, that's exactly what happened, man. He laid me off and I was like, crap.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. But that was a blessing in disguise because, I realized, wow, it takes burning that boat to really make that move for me. Yeah. And that was a huge lesson for me. And what's interesting is this, I already had contacts with a lot of the clients and they become friends of mine. I reached out to a few of them and I said, hey, I need work. And I was looking for a job.
Yeah, right.
But then they mistook as like, oh, you're looking for projects. Oh, we'll send you some projects. Yeah. Next thing you know, I was just like bombarded with projects, and I ended up hiring more people. And there you go. I was a business owner.
Started your own marketing agency.
Started my own design and marketing agency, and and just kind of blew up from there. My first year, man, I made like $800,000. That was like 3x what I was making at the time. And I'm like, whoa, I should have just done this sooner. you know,
Yeah.
that old adage of like, oh, you could have done it sooner. Looking back. But yeah, I mean, so that was kind of the start of my design agency career, which led me to product development. Talked about Shark Tank earlier. So I was on Shark Tank. I invented a product called Soap Socks. It's basically a washcloth for kids, and looked like a stuffed animal. Terry cloth outside, sponge inside. You feed it soap. You dunk it in water. You lather it. Kids, use it to scrub their body. Put it in the washer and dryer. You dry it. It becomes their friend outside and inside the tub.
Okay.
And so,
Very nice.
we pitched that to the sharks. Make the long story short, they really liked the product. After destroying us for like an hour and 40 minutes, they wanted to buy us out. They offered us $1 million to buy us out. And we're like, nope, screw you guys. We're going to walk away and do this ourselves.
Wow.
So we did that. And we took it to market, successfully took it to market. In fact, I'm still part owner of that. I'm just not involved in the day-to-day. But this year, we actually made Oprah's favorite things.
No kidding. Yeah. That's amazing. Okay.
Yeah. So it's still going. But yeah, I'm not as involved. 2020 happened and basically shut down all of Los Angeles because of a little known thing called COVID.
Yeah.
So I decided around that time, like, man, I'm tired of all these businesses. I really want to go to real estate, and it really just solidified my idea of my end game is now. That real estate end game is starting now. Why wait? Especially since COVID made me realize, wow, I'm staying afloat even though none of my other businesses are making money because everything's shut down.
All from your real estate.
Yeah, because I had enough investment to kind of at least maintain where I am. Like, whoa, okay, I think I might have reached financial freedom here. At least enough to cover, my monthly nut.
Yeah. I mean, that's the ultimate freedom, right? When your passive real estate exceeds your annual income needs, right, for your expenses, then you're there. So very good. Okay. And this was just 2020 when this happened.
2020 was when I realized it.
Okay.
It's probably been going on for a while, and I'll be honest with you, Randy. Like, I've never actually tracked my net worth or my cash flow. Like, I'm a builder, so I just love being in there and figuring things out. To this day, like, the one sheets and stuff, like, I don't pay attention too much to that, to be honest.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, because I feel like, I'm there to just build. Like, I love that. I'm a product developer by heart. So, and that's how I look at real estate now too. It's a product. Real estate to me is a product.
So dig into that. So you're working at W2. You're helping build this marketing agency, and then you have this product launch with the very cool toy that you had. But the whole time you're buying real estate on the side. So are you buying single families? Are you doing this ADU process yet? Did you look into multifamily? Like, what did the real estate journey look like for you?
All right. So very simple. I'm in Los Angeles. Everything is very expensive here, as you know. Multifamily is probably, at least at the time, it felt like it wasn't within my financial reach.
Sure.
So I was looking at single family. I was rehabbing, flipping houses, learning how to do that. Basically, learning how to burr properties. Most of them I was flipping, like making small amounts, like 20, 30,000 at a time.
And in LA, I would imagine if you're doing, what's the average purchase price out there? It's got to be, God, 400,000, 500,000, 600,000, isn't it? When you're doing those, or?
Well, at the time, it was a little bit less than that. We're talking about we're talking about early 2000s, right? Before 2000 to about 2008 is when I started kind of learning this whole thing, craft. And I wasn't buying a lot because I couldn't afford it. I didn't know I can use hard money. I had no idea that was a thing.
Sure.
In fact, hard money was a bad word. Like, oh, you don't want to do that. Too high interest. Like, I was thinking too small. I didn't really understand the word leverage for financial leverage for real estate then. And so I was saving 20%, 25% at the time, which was a thing. And then
traditional financing, you were
right.
Unreal.
And then before 2008, before the crash, they got really creative with the financing too. Like all of a sudden you got your 80-10-10, like all of a sudden everything's free. I'm like, oh wow, okay.
Yeah.
Sure, I'll buy property now, and I still save money for like the construction or the rehab. But yeah, so that was my entry to buying property. But did I buy multifamily? No, I kind of stuck with single family to that point. And now I bought some property out of state, like in Florida at the time, I think 2006 or 2007, right before the crash. But it was at that point, like everything's kind of really high, very expensive.
Sure.
It's almost the top of the market before it crashed, and kind of lost some money on that. At the time, very different climate. Everybody was an investor.
Right. Right.
There's definitely too much. What's the right word here? There's too many units out there that are rental properties and not enough renters because everybody's buying houses.
Sure.
Sure.
Interest rates are low, right?
Yeah, interest rates are low. So the biggest challenge there was like you can't find renters because anybody can buy a home. And I didn't realize that at the time. So so I lost some money when I bought some property out of state because it was, I got sold into this whole turnkey investing, which
down the same path. Yeah.
Yeah, which now I don't necessarily believe in that. So anything turnkey, I don't buy anything turnkey anymore. I learned my lesson on that. So I decided then let me kind of just stick to Los Angeles because I know the area. I can keep an eye on stuff. I understand this market. And so after 2008, I decided just start looking at long-term buy and hold.
Okay.
Yeah, and I bought my first.
And you're still using your own money on all of these deals. You're not using other people's money yet. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I didn't start using other people's money until probably earlier this year.
No kidding.
So like I don't know. Like I've learned from the past that like I'm just too afraid. I'm too responsible for other people's money. It stresses me out more than anything else. So like make sure. I want to make sure everybody's paid because I've been there before, I've invested in other businesses and other things like that. And I'm like, there's no guarantees. And so I wanted to hone my craft as an operator to make sure I know that I can deliver. And so that's one of the key decisions I made before. Like, I'm not going to raise funds unless I know exactly what I'm doing. Okay. I'm at that level where I have the infrastructure and all the different exit strategies. I'm all about exit strategies, man. Especially after 2008, like
I can imagine. Yeah.
And especially after 2020, it's like, what you think, I had all these other businesses and I thought, hey, I've got everything covered, but a crash like that, like, a COVID like that, like all of a sudden, like, whoa. You get the rug pulled right underneath you and you don't know. And it's a good thing I'm diversified.
Okay. So you've been in real estate for 20 plus years, buying and selling, buy and hold primarily, it sounds like. Well, let's talk about the strategies themselves. So what kind of strategies? You mentioned BRRRR, and everybody knows the BRRRR strategy, but up until probably this year, you were just saving money, doing your own 20% down. What's shifted this year, and what does your current strategy look like?
Well, let me say, like, I haven't really raised funds until this year, but I started using hard money probably around 2018, 2019. That's when I kind of discovered the power of hard money. I'm like, at the time, like, why hard money? I don't get it. Sure. But I realized like, I can borrow 90% and I can borrow the construction cost. I can borrow the construction loan for the construction cost. I'm like, and if I refinance, I've been doing that all along. I just didn't have the right kind of formula.
Right.
And then I realized, oh, I can negotiate the rates.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
And I'm like, oh, this is getting better.
Okay.
And so I started realizing there's different leverages that allows me to get better deals, get better relationships, get better resources. And 20 is when I started realizing, okay, maybe I got to look at this more in a better financial model and really scaling this way.
Yeah.
I brought in a partner to manage operations because I don't want to be in the daily operations at that point. So I brought in a partner who is a younger version of me.
There you go.
He's also he's also a construction engineer by trade.
Very good.
And he's also general contractor license, and he's hungry, and he's got the hustle, and he's got the business mindset, and we're operating in the same area, and we decided let's just partner, see where this goes, and everything just kind of fit.
That's great. Okay, and you found through the power of hard money that you can do more projects. If the numbers work with the added cost of the hard money, then you can do more projects. And then just recently you found if you bring on partnerships, maybe capital partners, that you could even bring on more projects, I'm guessing, right?
That's right. So, and that's kind of where I'm operating now. Like here in Los Angeles, I've quickly realized, like, going back to this whole thing about investing out of state for me. So I invested in like multifamily. I even have an RV campground out of state. And, there's this whole sort of phenomenon that everybody's chasing a unit count. I think you and I were talking about this during one of the events, like everybody's infatuation of like, oh, I want to buy 5,000 units or 500,000 units. Yeah. And meanwhile, I'm thinking, man, I've done that. I've done the multifamily. I'm like, that's just more doors. Just means more headaches to me. You know, it just takes away my time. Sure. Even if I'm managing property managers, I'm like, man, I can't tell you how countless property managers I've fired.
Right. I'm sure over the years.
So I started going down this avenue of like, well, why don't I focus on figuring out the least amount of units? Like, let me 10x the cash flow somehow by figuring out what the exits are, by also 10x less the units, and see how I can make that work. So I started thinking differently. And then this is when I started putting my product development hat, because I'm like, and that's when it dawned on me, wow, people are looking at real estate incorrectly. People are looking at real estate as an investment when it's a product. If you create a product that has a need or solving a problem, that's going to create a lot of demand. And so I started seeking out like, okay, well, I'm in Los Angeles. There's a massive housing crisis here. Mm-hmm. And within that housing crisis, there's a subset of population that needs even more housing that are very underserved. So, outside of like short-term rental, mid-term rental, which, those are vacation rentals really, right? Or, COVID kind of spiked that up a little bit. But outside of that, you got the underserved. They're like assisted living facilities for elderly. You got assisted living for those who have mental disabilities or behavioral. They're overlooked. You got these guys who are like, who need sober homes.
Interesting.
Or treatment centers for rehab for addiction.
Yeah.
So I started going down that path of like, wow, okay, I can create a formula. I can create a product for all these different exits that will not only 10x my cash flow, but then I don't have to buy that many units. Mm-hmm. And I can start looking at whatever deals I can find or whatever property I can even find in MLS that people aren't recognizing as deals because they don't have the right exit. But if I look at it at this lens, all of a sudden, what that doesn't look like a deal is a deal.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, absolutely.
So I started coming up with this idea, and I think we spoke about this, that I'm calling kind of like a Swiss Army knife. It's a Swiss Army house. Okay. There's multiple different strategies. So now I'm developing this idea of creating a product specifically for a co-living model where I can either use it for different strategies, and I can pivot at any time,
regardless of what's going on with the political landscape, regardless of what's going on with lending. If you've got a similar type of product that works for 4 or 5 different models, then all of a sudden you have all kinds of options, right?
That's right. So I started the last few years, I've been developing teams to work on all of those different models, like Airbnbs, I've got that. I got Airbnbs, midterm rental, short-term rental. I've got that. I've been experimenting with that. I've got co-living models like student housing. That's another need, right? Student housing. There's also co-living models like rent by the room, furnished rent by the rooms. So I can do that too, because there's a huge need here. There's an affordability issue, but we start renting them by the room. You can effectively, like get better rents and keep them occupied. And you got the ADUs also. That's another thing here in California and Los Angeles. It's like with the ADUs, like that's one thing that California did right was allow these new zoning, I guess upzoning of these single families. All of a sudden I can build 4 units, even some areas like San Diego can build up to 8-10 units in one parcel.
Yeah.
And
can you explain what an ADU is? We don't talk about ADUs a lot. And it's a phenomenon. I think that I think it started actually in Hawaii, and now we're seeing a lot in LA and California, and it's actually coming into Arizona now quite a bit as well. But can you talk about ADU a little bit?
Yeah, I don't know if it started in Hawaii. I think it actually started in Los Angeles.
Did it? Okay.
I believe, but I know Hawaii has it. They're called casitas, but they're basically like another unit. In Los Angeles, you can do different variations of an ADU. An ADU stands for accessory dwelling unit. It's not technically a second unit, but it's considered. They look at it, at least in Los Angeles right now, they look at it as an amenity. It's kind of like having a pool house, but you can rent it out separately, right?
Okay.
So I can convert a garage into an ADU or a living space that I can actually rent out.
Okay.
And that's kind of their solution to being able to solve this housing crisis, have you able to develop these things. Seattle is a little bit more advanced now because they're more progressive over there. But in Seattle, you're allowed to sell these units separately. Which all of a sudden,
where in LA you can't do that in LA.
Well, they had just passed a law. The governor just signed a law saying that you can, but the infrastructure is still not in place to actually execute that.
Got it.
So that takes some time. The city moves too slow. But in anticipation of that being a thing, this is why I'm building these additional units now, because that's just gonna ramp up the equity portion of it. Not only that, but the cash flow. And what's interesting about this is California. California's got the stigma that everybody's like, oh, don't invest in California. You can't invest there. It's just a appreciation play. You can't cash flow there. Well, no, that's wrong. I'm cash flowing, and appreciation is awesome, especially if you know how to force appreciation. You build a value really quickly. Like if I can build something at 200 to 225, 250 per square feet, but all of a sudden retail value is around 800, 900 per square foot. Like,
unreal.
You're going to win all day on just valuation. And if you build more units, more bedrooms, that's just more cash flow, and I'm able to burn these out because I've created all these value and cash flow already. Take all my money out. It's all of a sudden it's infinite return. And then the second layer of like putting these businesses on top, like assisted living, that's just going to 10x everything.
Oh my goodness.
And so that's kind of my model right now. And what's interesting about this, just with the ADUs and rent control is another thing that people are scared of in California. But little known fact that most people don't understand is that any new build in Los Angeles, in California, is exempt from rent control for the next 15, the day they're issued their certificate of occupancy. So it's like there's opportunity here. So, you can build units are exempt from rent control. That's a big thing.
Okay.
That's huge. That's huge. Yeah.
And
So,
it actually adds a premium probably to any units that are newer than 15 years old, I would imagine, right?
yep, that's exactly it. So, and it's, I'm headed that path. Like I'm developing now. Like I call them micro developments, I guess. We do ground up developments, but those take a long time. Permitting takes a long time here. But there's all these little tricks that we do. Like we'll buy a 2-bedroom house, that's on the market, 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house, which seem expensive to a lot of people because it's like 2 bedrooms sound expensive, right? Because they're usually, looked at differently, right? But I'm looking at it like, ooh, that 2-bedroom, I can turn that into a 4-bedroom if I just add 500 square feet to it. I'm going to double the value just with that. If I put an ADU in the back, that's bonus. If I put another ADU in the back, that's even more bonus.
Right.
So all of a sudden it becomes a great deal. And so, the value there is, the opportunity there is, if you know how to kind of do the small developments, that you can accomplish within, we're turning some of these units between 6 to about 18 months at a time. So much quicker than, these larger builds. A lot of syndication is like 3 to 5 years, man. I look at that now as an opportunity cost for me.
Yep. Well, this has been eye-opening, and I think it's a different conversation than what we've had on this podcast for the last, going on 2.5 years or so. And I think it's a good option for a certain type of investor that is looking to work with somebody like you to put some of their money to work. So we won't get into the details because I know a lot of the details are still being worked out about what type of opportunities are going to be available for you. But if our listeners wanted to reach out to you and talk a little bit more about this and see how these type of strategies could fit into their portfolio, how could our listeners find you?
Oh, I'm ramping up my social media.
Okay.
This year, I've been told you got to go on social media. You got a really cool, interesting story and really great strategy that no one's thinking about. And they're like, you got to reach and teach more people out there. So I've started ramping up my social media, which is, I was initially very uncomfortable with because I was kind of a DIY guy, stealth wealth, but all of a sudden all right, if I'm impacting as many lives as possible, that's my goal. I guess maybe it's my duty to do so. So I'm on Instagram, I guess all social media. You can find me at Alvinized, ALVINIZED. Okay. If you just Google that or whatever, you'll find me.
You're everywhere. Okay.
I guess I'm everywhere now.
Very good. Very good. Well, that's how I found you initially, everywhere in GoBundance. Started seeing your videos on some of the WhatsApp and then found you on social. So yeah, this has been fun, Alvin. I think there's a lot of interesting opportunity that's going to come in the coming years, especially in this space. And as affordable housing continues to be a bigger and bigger issue, it's going to provide more opportunity for passive investors to get involved with operators like yourself. So I appreciate you coming on the show and helping us understand a little bit more about the positive aspects and benefits of working with somebody like yourself. So thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, let's do this. I do have a few questions I like to ask everybody before we wrap up. So let's jump into those real quick, and I will send you on your way. I know you've got a lot going on today. So if you were to give some advice to the newer passive investor, is there any specific educational resource that you would suggest they start with or be sure to have on their bookshelf?
Oh, it's funny because I've been on a path of identifying what worked for me in my success, what brought me success. And there's 4 things that I've really focused on. Number 1 is skill set. Number 2 is relationships. Number 3 is resources. And number 4, the most important thing, is time. If you start focusing on all 4 of these, let's say you are able to buy back your time will allow you to get yourself more skill set to develop.
Yeah.
Skill set leads to more resources and relationships. And all of these actually can kind of go and help each other kind of rise up. So it's almost like I'm constantly playing this game of like trying to figure out what to do next, elevate one to elevate the others. And that's one of the most important things I developed while I was kind of working my way through my path and my journey. And a very powerful book that I've read recently is this Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell.
I love it. Yeah.
This is a great book, man. Like, you know, I've been kind of figuring out how to buy back my time, and it just kind of 10x, you know, I guess that direction for me. You know, I got myself like an executive assistant, more virtual assistants. You know, I was able to think outside of being a DIY entrepreneur, of like just delegating. I mean, that was a big thing. You can't ever buy back your time unless you're delegating. And that's a big key lesson that I've learned. And so I've been, and most important thing too, is once you buy back your time, don't just be watching Netflix all day. You know, you got to start using that time now to start buying yourself, you know, education, learning new skill sets. That's what I'm doing. Like every time I'm always like, okay, what's the next thing I got to chart? What's the next education I'm learning? Doing assisted living. Next year, I'm going to start tackling sober living. So I'm always leveling up by finding more resources and relationships within those. And then within that, once I establish that, then I'm also looking for more time by finding like operators, partners. You know, I've learned that real estate is a team sport. Especially if you guys want to scale, and not just in the business aspect of it, just even in its investment aspect of it. You know, there's definitely different versions that you can apply. With those
awesome.
four
I think
pillars.
that's great advice. I will put that in the show notes. And I like how you tied those together. So free up your time so you can improve your skill set and then focus on your relationships and resources. I'm curious, are there any podcasts that you're listening to that jump out?
Oh my gosh, I listen to so many podcasts, to be honest.
Oh, you do? Good.
All the time. Like I'm a podcast addict. Like, I have like 2 AirPods just because they keep running out. So I'm like having to, you know.
That's a great idea.
If I'm at the gym, I'm listening to like different things. I mean, I started with like, for new investors, Bigger Pockets, great resource.
Sure.
I discovered that in 2019, and I'm like, oh, house hacking. Oh, I've been doing that already. It's called house hacking, you know.
Yeah.
So I've learned all those things before, but Bigger Pockets is just shortcut to knowledge. I listen to All In podcasts because I like keeping up with the political climate, and I just love the conversations they have. They're so much smarter than I am, so I'm like, okay, I can learn from these guys.
Yeah, no doubt.
And then I just random stuff, man. Like, you know, I listen to some CPA podcasts so I can learn how to, tax benefits, things like that. You know, listen to Ken McElroy's podcast. I forgot the name of it. But just obviously Brandon Turner's podcast.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, just, you know, I just engulf myself with anything I can get my hands on. I don't really have a favorite, man. Like I like to diversify just because to me knowledge is, you know, kind of, I like to cast a wide net because the wider the net I can cast, the more information I can have, and I'm really good at piecing things together.
That makes
kind of form my own
sense.
opinion. Yeah.
Yep. Very good. All right. And then let's see, we spent a lot of time talking about due diligence. So I'm curious, is there a due diligence question that you think passive investors should be asking that maybe they're not? Maybe a non-obvious due diligence question?
Well, I will tell you from an operator standpoint, I mean, anyone can seem like they're doing big things. You just have to make sure they have the track record. And sometimes that's really hard to identify right off the bat because, you know, you have to understand that if this person is operating for a long time, then they must know what's going on. If they've gone through dips and realized the pain of making corrections, those are the operators you want, because they made those mistakes. They're not going to make those mistakes again. I mean, to me, that's more important. It's all about the operator. You know, investors really need to look at the operator and where they've been, and not how good their investor deck looks like, because anybody can put that together. You know,
Anybody with a couple $100 can have a beautiful investor deck, right?
Yeah, and I personally feel like before you invest in anybody, watch them first. Watch them for the first year or two. Keep an eye on it. Ask other investors that invested with them, have they actually done a full cycle or not? You know, or you know, what's their reputation like? You know, even within GoBundance, you know, like everybody's like, you know, everybody's kind of concerned about certain operators that so-called have good reputations, you know. Even for me right now, like I'm scared to raise funds right now, to be honest, just because like, okay, let me just thread the water lightly. You know, I want to make sure I prove this, you know, prove out some of these. Well, not just that, but like, you know, I want to make sure I get full cycle with some of my new investors, just because I want to feel good that they feel good. Yeah. That they got their money back. So I'm almost like, I guess, tapering some of the fundraising just because I want to make sure I can continue and give a good experience.
I think that's really smart. I think it's really smart because it's you don't know what you don't know, right? And you're playing in a new arena with new strategies, and there's probably a lot of unknowns. And I think the cautious approach makes a lot of sense. So and it's difficult when I suspect, Alvin, that you have a lot of people that would actually throw money at you. So hats off and kudos to you.
Yeah, not so much that I'm not experienced in what I'm doing. It's more about I'm not experienced in raising money in capital and managing capital investors. So I'm still learning how to put funds together. And those are things I think you and I had a discussion before about. Right now I'm just raising for gap funding, which is basically just quick secondary promissory notes. I haven't really put together a debt fund. That's my next kind of level. Might start to look into that next year. And this is why I'm kind of pulling back a little bit until I understand what that looks like. And that's what I meant by pulling back, just because I want to understand that first. From an operating standpoint, I'm pretty sure I'm pretty confident with what we do. We've proven it out already. And, I just want to make sure though that I've got new investors. I don't want to burn anybody,
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think I might challenge you as well. I mean, we're both GoBundance guys, so hopefully you're open to it. But you possess skills and have the ability of creating wealth for yourself. And I think you're doing your audience a disservice if you don't make that available to them.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I it's funny. My wife's looking at me right now. She's like, "Wait, you're too humble." Just kidding.
Yeah. Yeah. But no, I'd rather have that than the opposite. So thank you for that. But yeah, I would urge you, just to consider to not go too slow with that, because there's a lot of investors out there that could use a partner like you to work with. So
I appreciate that. I just want to make sure to I understand the process correctly.
Of course, of course. Yeah. I agree with your wife though, so don't be so modest. All right. Well, here's a couple of fun ones just to wrap us up, and we'll let you go on your way and keep creating wealth for you and your investors. But is there a bucket list item that you've recently checked off your list, or one you're hoping to in the near future?
Well, this has to do with family. So my kids have always been fans of Disney, and so we're traveling to Japan in a couple months.
Fantastic.
To go. The bucket list is to check off all the Disney parks and all of the world.
No kidding.
We're going to our first international one, and I'm really excited about that. Kids are excited about it. My firstborn has been studying Japanese, learning Japanese just so he can go. So
fantastic.
But so that's one of the bucket lists that I've had, and and just travel in general, like,
Yeah.
up until this point, up until before I go, before I joined GoBundance, I've never really traveled. Like, I've always worked, and like, I found a lot of enjoyment and passion in just building stuff, and never really dabbled in the adventure aspect of travel. So,
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah, that is one thing that brought me to GoBundance, and I've experienced the same thing since joining. So, not that this is an advertisement for GoBundance, but live life big, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, and then our final question I want to ask you is: if you had $100,000 you had to invest today, but you couldn't put it in one of your own deals, where would you put that $100,000?
Oh man, that's a question I was struggling with, actually.
Yeah.
Because the first thing that comes to mind is I wouldn't even put it in a deal for myself. I would actually invest it in education to teach my kids something somehow. And I don't have a specific on that yet, but that's kind of where I want to put that info on, because really, that's kind of where I need to be. It's like I look at legacy and execution, and in this part of my journey, it's like it's all about figuring out how to invest more into my kids' education in one way or another, without me forcing education down their throat. So yeah, I don't have a specific direction for that. but that's my first instinct, is like, it's not going to go to myself, because I don't need that money to invest in, because I can generate money on my own. But if I had an extra $100,000 laying around, this is where I need to put it.
The answer. I heard a quote recently. It probably was in GoBundance, actually, where people always trying to figure out this legacy piece, and like, how much do you leave your kids? And I don't know who said it, but they said the ideal amount to leave your kids is enough that they can do anything, but not so much that they don't have to do anything. And I like that. I like that idea. Let's give them the resources and the opportunity to do anything that they want, but let's make sure that they earn that and have to work and have to hustle and have to go out there and get things done. So I really like that answer. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah,
I've not heard that answer yet.
There's an interesting thing that me and a couple of other friends of mine are kind of discussing about this word legacy. The word legacy sounds very selfish. As a word for me, it's like, oh, my legacy. I want my kids to carry my legacy. To me, that just seems so selfish, right? But there's also another meaning to that. It's like, passing something from generation to generation, right? Yeah. That to me is much more powerful, much more meaningful. It doesn't necessarily mean monetary and asset or wealth, right?
Yep.
But just the idea of teaching my kids how to actually build stuff.
Yep.
Educating them on how to actually start something. The reason I say that, I think it's really important to do that, is because I've seen my family's generational wealth kind of crumble, because my dad never kind of took over that business. So they kind of crumbled, and he tried to build his own legacy, but he didn't have the framework to do that. He had to sort of learn in a kind of weird way, and he just didn't get very far, because he never had that sort of grit and framework and discipline to kind of start that up. And this is why, for me, like, my focus on my kids is not talking about teaching them how to be shepherds of wealth, but more so like, I want you guys to learn how to build things on your own, build it from ground zero. Because what good is this thing if I give it to you, if you don't even know what to do with it? And what happens if it goes down, if it crumbles? Can you rebuild on your own?
Right.
Because if they can rebuild on their own, so the legacy is, to me, is like educating them on how to create their own wealth. And if they have my foundation, my wealth to begin with, then they can just build on top of that. Right. But it's not for them to have. I don't want them to have a sense of entitlement. In fact, we don't even give our kids allowances. Everything they do, they earn on their own. I have a 10-year-old and 11-year-old. I mean, a 10-year-old who's turning 11, and then I have a 14-year-old who, when he turned 14, I gave him the book Rich Dad Poor Dad for teens, and he just opened his eyes. And And, I told him, look, you want to learn how to invest, learn how to learn liabilities and assets. And he learned that. And just a couple of days ago, he's asking me, hey, Dad, I want to invest in some stocks. And he was kind of like going back and forth. He picked out Apple and Tesla. And we're like, all right, which one are you going to go with?
Yeah.
And he picked Apple. And guess what? 2 days ago, Tesla shot up like 22%. He's like, damn it.
Good lesson to learn early on.
Good lesson to learn. But I was so proud of him that he actually made that decision to invest on his own. And I didn't have to force it down his throat. Like, they're learning how to see things in a different light. Yeah.
Well, Alvin, this has been great. I really appreciate the discussion. And as I mentioned before, you kind of opened my eyes to some different opportunities that I've not been considering. So thank you so much for being on the show. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right. To our listeners, as always, we urge you to continue that education journey in passive investing. More important than that, though, we urge you to make the decision to invest in your first or in your next passive investment deal. I am convinced that once you do, you'll just wish that you had started that much earlier. So again, join us next Thursday for another great episode. And don't forget to like and subscribe on your favorite channel. And thanks again for joining us today.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Another episode of The Gentle Art of Crushing It. It was an amazing episode. We know we sure learned a lot, and we hope you did as well. We want to take a second and thank you so much for viewing or listening to this episode. And please just know that we only ask for one favor, and that is to make this life magnificent. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.